Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the AI Shiatori channel. I haven't labeled this stream the Scourge of the Shires because we're focusing not on a news topical story beyond our circle. I just thought that this probably wasn't the appropriate title to use at this one. So there's been a bit of schisms going on in the distant right community. One of particular which it's been more of a I think it's for me it's become more noticeable since the Her Majesty the Queen's funeral, the week of mourning that we experienced, and the I would say general reaction from American leftists and liberals, but also um, the experience that was felt in Britain during that week, where effectively all sense of modernity and the sort of progressive world um, was kind of drowned out for that short period, and we had this very refreshing return to uh, English civilization, I would say, pure English civilization, and um, uh, a monarchy in which we experience not so much power but authority, sort of the ancient medieval rituals that our new King Charles III went through, and then of course the burial and the passing of the throne to the new monarch. So that in and itself was very unique because it almost felt like um, you know the, a bit of the old world broke through, and I saw it in my local community. I saw it. I knew others were sort of referencing it in their areas that you had this really um, genuine sense of unity, not any sort of astroturf unity behind, sending money to a corrupt country in the in Eastern Europe, or some ideological belief to worship a dead criminal in America. This was a genuine sense of unity which tapped into the psyche and the spirit of the English people and the Scottish people and everything else. And so this was a very positive um, event, I think. Even so, during that time, I do want to stress this though from the outset. I'm not accusing any American in our circle um, who of behaving inappropriately during that sort of during the Queen's funeral. I didn't see any American in that I follow and that follows me um, any sort of you know mock or show any sort of disrespect to Her Majesty the Queen and the royal family and Britain and everything, and the uh, the state mourning. I didn't see that. I saw it from a lot of Irish accounts, one of which that used to follow me. I don't think they do now. Probably a good thing overall. But I saw the only Americans that I did see who were, um, infecting the mood with the their Americanized perception of the world was just usual race activists and liberals and other sort of disturbing groups of people. But that to be expected. From there, after that week of the national mourning, everything sort of returned back to normal, and um, we then had, of course, academic agent who did a stream on about I guess it was in reference to a reviewed bit of work that Julius Evola wrote called the, and YouTube. This is the actual title, the Negrification of America. I'm not going to read it out here because I've had quite a few strikes against my channel. So, but if you type that in, you'll be able to find probably a WordPress document on that. It's definitely worth reading because it's quite interesting. In that stream he did with I think it's is it Paul Fahrenheit or something like that. There was a bit of back and throw about what is American culture and whether is there any sort of distinction between American culture and African American culture in the modern world. The origins of certain jazz and dance and what have you. Um, and so that was the sort of takeaway that he was coming from the stream, was you just had this fundamental disagreement about the is there an element of Americans on the right coping and I guess being delusional about what their what their sort of regional, when I say regional culture, I mean not just in the States, but maybe even like what they have on a sort of county level or region, as in Appalachian Mountains or what have you. Is it still dominant enough to exert itself and be distinctive? And that was what the sort of debate sort of got into. Especially when you look at sort of your average MAGA voter, a Republican conservative voter in the US, particularly around those sorts of people, and whether they are representative of the same type of Americans, the same type of Americans that had existed in previous generations. And so it went on, from that sort of division to more recently, in the last few days, the other piece of Evola's work, which was the American Civilization. Now, it's important to note that Evola is very, very hostile to America, and you have to remember that in the post-war period, the of course the Axis powers were defeated, and the British Empire was also defeated. In that, even though that they won on the Allied side, they were still defeated because the multiple reasons which we could look into another stream, but the British Empire was defeated, and so the vacuum to fill world hegemon was fell towards America. And then, of course, in the East, you had the Soviet civilization, the Soviet Empire, from not just the Soviet Union, but also their satellite states in Eastern Europe and East Germany. And so from his perspective, though the choice in Italy, which cultural sphere to be under, it was either you're under the Soviet system, or you're under the American system. And from his perspective on that, the Soviet system, while it was vicious and brutal, its sole purpose was just exerting just raw power, brutal power over the people. With America, though, the American play of instituting power wasn't just on numbers and garrisons and sort of troop occupation. While we saw that in Germany and the creation of NATO and everything, it was also on a very strong cultural means of power as well, through entertainment industry, radio, uh, the fashion industry, really all aspects, every life. And he talks about in Italy how everything became Americanized, and that's, people were quite willing to accept that, and the fact that the ones that were the most willing at his time were the most degenerate of all, of people. Um, but also you had when everything there was an issue at hand, uh, America was always seen as the place to look to for help. Um, and so this is his point of view. He has a very, very hostile and negative view of America. He finds America, I think he finds America even more sort of dangerous, let's say, to from his perspective, the Italy than the Soviets. And so that's the argument you're coming from. So Julius Evola is quite anti-American in his work, in his outlook. And of course, on this channel, we've been critical of what we call the global American empire. So that's the culture that comes from America, which is primarily the civil culture that comes from coastal America. And I've been able to draw distinctions between two groups in America. I understand that there are cultures within America that are vastly different. That there is who aren't crazy left wingers, and that you see in New York, California, and that's fair enough. But the point is, what I wanted to get at hand tonight was not to discuss whether or not America is a sort of a pan united culture, or if it's just a collection of regional cultures based off various ethnic groups that have settled in certain states or anything, because that is I mean, not I've had two Americans who've interacted that I've with me, where one said that well it American culture is a thing, and then another one saying no, American culture isn't a thing. It's actually more sort of collection of subgroups. So I've had conflicting information on the issue. I've never been to America, so I can't attest which I think is more accurate. But one thing that I wanted to sort of delve into is actually, why is it people like Evola, and why is it that there are elements on the right that have such hostile views to uh, to America, but also Americanism? And in this country, just to give a brief history, in the UK, there was, I guess you'd say, the old sort of Tory types in your 80s and 90s, before the modern sort of the modern sect. You had sort of this hostility, soft hostility to Americanisms. The most notable one was with the death of Princess Diana, where you had this public display of illogical and bizarre grieving, which was completely alien to the British and English experience. In that was viewed by many as an imported Americanism. And so from the right, I get, well, not from the left, but from the right, that was quite a negative characteristic that was imported. And so that's my, and so it's quite interesting, because the term Americanism is something I've been seeing more and more often over the last few days. And it's not, because usually in this country, any anti-American sentiment usually comes from people on the left, socialists, even those in the Labour Party. I did see one young Labour activist today who gave at a fringe event, who gave a sort of speech against sending money to the Ukrainian government, and he sort of listed out reasons why. I mean, I don't totally disagree with what he said. I think there was some very valid points in there, um, especially around NATO and what have you. But so yeah, it sort of exists on both sides. We also have. I think this is because he changes his name every so often. You got Makuta Teradak or something like that. Is that, or maybe that's a different person. He says, I think personally schism is a result of misunderstanding terms, resulting in a lot of friendly fire, which could cause schism if it has already happened. Well, yes. Let's look into the document, and I've actually read this several times yesterday. Um, um, I read this several times yesterday, and I've gone through it again today. I've also put a link in chat to a YouTube account, which there's somebody who adds like really sort of banging music over the top with films, edits of films from the 90s, and it's quite interesting because the Evola's criticism of America actually plays out in a lot of 90s films like American Beauty, or Office Space, or I think also things like Falling Down and what have you. So, and that's quite interesting because there seems to be this point like in the late sort of 90s that there's like a bizarre self-awareness to the faults in the American system, and that's what we're going to sort of go over. But not just the faults in the American system, but also is there a problem in the American their own outlook? Okay, as I said, this isn't targeted at any one American. I'm not here to insult any individuals on here. Um, and JD, we're not talking about Johnny Mercer's wife. um, um, so yeah, for me, I put a sharper distinction between red and blue America. Yeah, but the thing is, I'm not talking about red or blue America, because the thing there is, what we're going to talk about here, and whatever let's talk about, transcends the red and blue America and goes into the psyche of the nation and what the, I guess you see the national mythos of what Americans believe. So this isn't really a red and blue America thing. This is what Americans believe. So I'm going to read a bit out. I might try and interject a bit, but try and read out as much as possible. So American civilization. The recently deceased John Dewey, for people want to know, that he was a progressive educational reformer, and did a lot of work in sort of metaphysics and what have you. And I think he was also a communist as well. The recently deceased John Dewey was applauded by the American press as the most representative figure of American civilization. This is quite right. His theories are entirely representative of the vision of man and life, which is the premise of Americanism and its quote unquote democracy. The essence of such theories is this, that everyone can become what he wants to within the limits of the technological means at his disposal. Equally, a person is not what he is from his true nature, and there is no real difference between people, only difference in qualification. According to this theory, everyone can be anyone he wants to be if he knows how to train himself. This is obviously the case with the self made man. In a society which has lost all sense of tradition and notion of personal aggrandizement, would extend into every aspect of human existence, reinforcing the egalitarian doctrine of pure democracy. If the basis of such ideas is accepted, then all natural diversity has to be abandoned. Each person can presume to possess the potential of everyone else, and the terms superior and inferior lose their meaning. Every notion of distance and respect loses meaning. All lifestyles are open to all. To all organic conceptions of life, Americans oppose a mechanistic conception. In a society which has started from scratch, everything has the characteristic of being fabricated. In American society, appearances are masks, not faces. At the same time, proponents of the American way of life are hostile to personality. Right, so that's the first bit. So you have to remember with Evola, he is a aristocrat who believes in hierarchy, in a form of natural hierarchy, but also um, um, uh, the idea of inferior and superior peoples. And and so his thesis on this is the American conception of the individual. We'll get onto this, I think, in a bit later on, but the individual self-made man has created really this dysfunctional class where you don't have a natural aristocracy like you had in Europe and in UK, when you had a sort of like what you had with hereditary peers, for example, in the Lords or something, until Blair came in, which fairly recently. But you still have, in the UK, you still have uh, what uh, historical families with historical titles and lands and, and positions. So I know that he'll get on to the original point, where he will say, well, Virginia, of course, the old um, aristocratical families from the before the revolutionary days, the uh, who were the sort of the agricultural um, and cotton producing uh, families of the Americas. Of course, that sort of people were uh, obliterated in the aftermath of the American Civil War. Uh, and also going forward, it would be the westward expansion. So let's continue this. The Americans' open mindedness, which is sometimes cited in their favour, is the other side of their inferior formlessness. The same goes for their individualism. Individualism and personality are not the same. The one belongs to the formless world of quantity, the other to the world of quality and hierarchy. The Americans are the living refutation of a uh, Carti- uh, Cartesian uh, axiom. I think, therefore I am. Americans do not think, yet they are. The American mind, puerile and primitive, lacks characteristic form and is therefore open to every kind of standardization. Okay, remember his words, not mine. um, and so I view this, and this is something I've sort of been thinking about today, because there's been lots of clips of like Lizzo playing James Madison's flute while twerking and everything. And I've been thinking about how can I get this across that sort of understands the some stuff like this happening. And I think one of the problems with the American society and that of its people is forget the intermixing of ethnic groups, of European groups, where so there isn't like a outside New England, because I know that New England has strong ethnic connections with English people and all that. Just forget that for a minute. But the intermixing, You also have the problem is because it is as Evola puts it, a primitive and uh, uh, a nation started from scratch. They don't have a strong enough founding mythos to have a uh, sacred nature to their nation that they can't appreciate or even have this sort of mythical, legendary, sacred nature. And the reason I say that is if you look at that sort of Lizzo example with James Madison's flute. Now, of course, he was one of the uh, historically one of the founding members of the American Republic. And in many ways, because you don't really have symbols of the state, um, like in England, where you have object symbols of the state being the scepter, the orb, the crown, as a obvious choice. In America, I mean, it sort of comes down to the founding fathers, beyond the obviously the Declaration of Independence, but on objects of significant importance that you could equate to the scepter and the orb and the crown. I think James Madison's flute, maybe like George Washington's sword and clothing and uniforms and stuff like that. Those would be and in would you would think be classed as sacred, but the problem is it's not viewed as sacred because there is no concept of sacred available in the American psyche. Um, Maybe within aspects of religion, but the problem is, as we get onto the characteristic of the American is open-minded, and it's open-minded to every kind of standardization. And so the problem is every insane from uh, I guess I know Americans would like to start from FDR, but if you look from the uh, the Civil Rights Act onwards, every policy which was seen as intrusive on uh, groups such as white people in the South, forcing them to open their businesses to people that they would rather, that they wouldn't usually serve to, um, onwards, which the that becomes new normal for the American right, and they will end up defending. And it's kind of similar to what you have with conservatives in this country. I'm not trying to say that we're not as bad or anything. That's not the point I'm getting at. But the point being that anything that is intrusive, which has been passed in America, has always been defended by both sides. Anything which is anti-traditional, okay, maybe it will have some pushback in there in the moment, people like George Wallace and what have you, but overall it will become sort of the new normal. And then you see that with blacks for Trump, Hispanics for Trump, gays for Trump, that sort of stuff. And and today, if you were to go into American political system and try and I guess sort of kick back against that, it would be futile attempt. It would just be or any aspect of society, it'd be a futile attempt. All right, so let's continue this. Brought that up by mistake. In a superior civilization, as for example that of the Indo-Aryans, the being who is without characteristic form or caste in the original meaning of the word, not even that of servant or uh, Shudra, would emerge as a pariah. In this respected America, in this respected America is a society of pariahs. There is a role for pariahs. It is to be subjected to beings whose form and internal laws are precisely defined. Instead, the modern pariahs seek to become dominant themselves and to exercise dominance over all over the world. So that's as I mentioned earlier, that's a reference to the emergence as America as a world hegemon in a world of uh, ancient hierarchy and tradition. There is a popular notion about the United States that it is a quote unquote young nation with a great future before it. Apparent American defects are then described as the faults of youth or growing pains. It is not difficult to see that the myth of progress plays a large part in this judgment, indeed, and we've been very critical of this sort of Whig narrative of history and the sort of myth of progress on this channel. According to the idea that everything new is good, America has a privileged role to play among civilized nations. In the First World War, the United States intervened in the role of the civilized world par excellence. The most evolved nation had not only a right but a duty to interfere and in the destinies of other peoples. The structure of history is, however, cynical, not evolutionary. Sorry, cyclical and not evolutionary. It is far from being the case that the most recent civilizations are necessarily superior. So I would I want to do on this channel. This is what reminded me Spengler and his sort of perception of how history works, and it'd be quite interesting because I might do it from like it's like a Star Wars perspective, and the reason is because his belief, and I believe Evola's belief in this, is that it's, as he says, in the cycle system. So you sort of have the rise, the was it the rise, the ascendancies, and or the foundations, the ascendancies, and then ultimately the city state where it then collapses. And this you could be draw comparisons to the Greeks, the Romans, the Bronze Age, and what have you, and our modern age as well, if you wanted to. So yes. Sorry, I've lost my place. Okay. There is a necessary correspondence between the most advanced stages of a historical cycle and the most primitive. America is the final stage of modern Europe. Guinan, who is also who influenced our new king, King Charles III, so long may he reign, uh, called the United States the Far West, in the novel sense that American states represents the reductio ad absurdum of the negative and the most senile aspects of Western civilization. What in Europe exists in diluted form are magnified and concentrated in the United States, whereby they are revealed as the symptoms of disintegration and cultural and human regression. The American mentality can only be interpreted as an example of regression, which shows itself in the mental atrophy towards all higher interests and incomprehension of a higher sensibility. The American mind has limited horizons, one conscribed to everything which is immediate and simplistic, with the inevitable consequences that everything is made banal, basic, and leveled down until it is deprived of all spiritual life. Life itself, in American terms, is entirely mechanistic. The sense of tea in America belongs entirely to the physical level of existence. The typical American neither has the spiritual dilemmas nor complications. He is a natural joiner and conformist. The primitive American mind can only superficially be compared to a young mind. The American mind is a feature of the regressive society to which I've already referred. Okay, so the reason I say check out that video I attached on, and by the way, just say hello to current commentator. Hello, sir, friend of the channel, and of course, a big friend of the channel, Nathan CJ Hood. Please do check out his channel. He has some really good streams on, I wouldn't say similar topics, but topics of interest that we have on this channel, from religion to even I think more recently English identity. So please do check that out. And so on this point, the reason I attached that video that had another person reading over what we're going over now was for one simple reason, because it included these very, I guess you could say, sort of corpo world genre of film, and I guess you could say the sort of critique of capitalism in the United States, where where you're told you're an individual. From the American perspective, you are there's the ability of being the self-made man, yet you're just a graph on a sheet, a graph for the state, the government, the state, and for your employer. And Evola will get on to women and such in a minute, but you're also the deprived of any sort of spiritual connection. I think this goes down to the heart of what I was referencing earlier, where the problem is because of the youthfulness of the nation, is that ever since I guess you could say the American independence, the further westward they've expanded, the further disconnected they have been from Western civilization. And you think about it, the frontiers people in settling in areas of Louisiana Purchase and beyond later on, their threat, I guess you say their greatest threat or concerns, was the natural elements. And I think what Evola is trying to get at is that they actually became, the further west they went, the more disconnected they become. It wasn't so much, authority of London didn't it wasn't present, or that there wasn't some authority, because we know that there, the Wild West itself, I think it lasted for about 20 years. But the point was, it was almost like the further west they went, the less, I guess the sort of less grounded in any sort of historical or cultural connection to their ethnic group, whether that be English, German, Scot, whatever. And I think that comes from the actual concept of America itself as a propositional nation, that the fact that all boundaries of hierarchy, of religious authority, has been removed, and it is just a clean blank state started year zero. I think that is why the French revolutionaries, they tried to imitate we're told they tried to imitate the American Republic. And I think, and now many view it as, well, they tried to the Jacobins and co tried to imitate the American Republic, but was unsuccessful. I actually challenge you to this, everyone. They did imitate the American Republic, and they were successful. But the problem was, because France and the French people have a innate historical connection which transcends basic, any sort of political theory on that. They are, they're grounded in some sort of spiritual and civilizational hierarchy. When they try to act out that sort of clean slate American approach, it then just led to just outright disaster. That being though like the Reign of Terror. So I actually don't know if I actually think the French revolutions were successful, but they just it just was incompatible doing anything like that. And of course, it led to a massive pendulum swing in the other direction with Napoleon, who you didn't his commitment to faith is debatable, and I'm not talking about on the individual level of Napoleon, but Napoleon understood the concept of hierarchy and that sort of ancient wisdom, and he implemented it in his own way. So the next part is American morality. So here we go. The much vaunted sex appeal of American women is drawn from films, reviews, and pin-ups, and is largely printed fictitiously. So again, remember this was written in the mid-century. Okay, so just bear in mind that. A recent medical survey in the United States showed that 75% of young American women are without strong sexual feeling, and instead of satisfying their libido, they seek pleasure narcissistically in exhibitionism, vanity, and the cult of fitness and health in sterile sense. I guess you could say we see that with the gym culture today. Maybe. American girls have no hang-ups about sex. They are easygoing for the man who sees the whole sexual process as something in isolation, thereby making it uninteresting and a matter of fact, which at such a level it is meant to be. Thus, after she has been taken to the cinema or a dance, it is something like American good manners for the girl to let herself be kissed. This doesn't mean anything. American women are characteristically frigid and materialistic. The man who has his way with an American girl is under a material obligation to her. The woman has granted a materia. I favor. In cases of divorce, American law overwhelmingly favors the women. American women will divorce readily enough when they see a better bargain. It is frequently the case in America that a woman will be married to one already engaged to a future husband, the man she plans to marry after a profitable divorce. Yes, indeed. I think sort of a modern example of this, which is quite prevalent, is the former wife of Jeff Bezos, who married another wealthy man. I forgot his name now. She divorced him. And of course, divorce was, historically speaking, heavily restricted to certain circumstances, not just one seeking a financial better position. You did have annulments, which still exist in theory today in this country. I know that you look at social attitudes on the matter of divorce, and in this country, during that sort of time, you had several high-profile cases. One included the abdication of a king at the time for Wallace Simpson, who was this American, I think, double divorcee. And I mean, I remember my grandparents who were around at the time when they spoke about her, about the fact that she was divorced, was just it was I mean, for them and their sort of family, they found it unimaginable that this woman who, double divorced and then going after another man and everything. It almost, uh, seen as like a very immoral woman. And so Evola points out here that this is something which has really come from America, even though divorce being a mechanism within marriage, in historically speaking, though in America it's been used not as a means, I guess, to uh, whether a spouse has been unfaithful or they can't produce an heir or anything like in the annulment sense, but it's just being used as pure financial gain, not take counting for the spiritual and the uh, commitments that are required when you take your marriage vows. Are American media? Americanization in Europe is widespread and evident. In Italy, it is a phenomenon which is rapidly developing in these post-war years and is considered by most people, if not enthusiastically, at least something natural. Some time ago, I wrote that of two great dangers confronting Europe: Americanism and communism. The first is more insidious. Communism cannot be a danger other than in brutal and catastrophic form of a direct seizure of power by communists. On the other hand, Americanization gains ground by a process of gradual infiltration, affecting modifications of mentalities and customs which seem inoffensive in themselves, but which end up in fundamental perversion and degradation against which is impossible to fight other than within oneself. So this particular passage I actually do agree with great deal, and I would say you look at just remember this mid-century, but just look at the world after the collapse of the Soviet Union and their vassal states. You look at places like Hungary, Poland, even modern day Eastern Germany, and the Czechs and the Slovaks and everything. There has been a form of revival of national pride, of national spirit, of religion and traditionalism, especially in Hungary, and with Russia, and I think also in Ukraine in its own funny way as well. Though some of the nationalistic spirit can be a bit edgy. So that that being said, that is a visible thing. That's why we have like the sort of the concept of the based Visegrad group, the Eastern European bloc of post-Soviet nations. Now let's contrast that with Western Europe. In the aftermath of the war, Western Germany, at least, because I didn't really translate into East Germany in the same sense, but in Western Germany, you had the process called denazification, and there was a very good propaganda film I watched quite some time ago. I remember picking it up at a like a sort of one of those military surplus collections of like DVDs and such. And there was one. It was American. It was an American-made propaganda film, and it was for American troops who were going to West Germany in the 50s. I think it was like 1950, 51 dated. In that film, it was to teach, to basically teach them, this is what the German mind thinks, and this is how we want you to deconstruct that, or help us to deconstruct that German mind. And okay, you think of it being denazification, but the point, what I've noticed, even as a sort of young age at the time, was that while you had the obvious aspects of deconstructing National Socialist policies of the mid-century German Austrian painter, but the good portion of the propaganda was actually going back at looking at the Prussian tradition of Bismarck. of Frederick the Great. And then it went back even further to look at the Holy Roman Empire, and then looking at various Germanic states and the Saxon tradition, the warlike nature of the northern Germanic peoples. And what it sort of shot out to me was actually this wasn't really a denazification propaganda piece. It was a de-Germanization to demoralize and to deconstruct the German identity, to make it to destroy it. And I think, when you're looking at Evola's work here, to what end would it? To what end? But if we were to take from this work, I would say to what end it would be the reconstruction of a German identity based on the American principle. And it has led to some debate in our circles and distant right, is there anything left in the national German spirit? I think there is, but I think it's very much confided into East Germany. I think a lot. I think the problem is that the post-war psyop against the German people has been so strong and prevalent that if anyone tries to hark back to any traditional roots of Germany, they're automatically labelled, everything under the sun. But what's interesting is in that process, that wasn't only used on the German people; it was also used on the British people. It was used on the Italian people, the French people, and then, of course, everyone in the West, and particularly in the English-speaking nations. And what makes it it's like a colonization of the brain in many ways, is what sort of Evola is getting at here. Is it actually changes modes and means of behavior, and how once it changes that, and that generation comes through with that Americanized perspective of the world, it's quite difficult or impossible really to fight against that, because that fight has to come really from within and then reconnecting. But then if you're how do you reconnect with the tradition which is so alien to you, even though that is native to your people and your country? And I think that is the problem that's been we've faced in the UK. I think it is fair to say, if you look at regional nationalism in the UK, so Irish nationalism, in the modern conception of Irish nationalism, dating back to before the Easter Rising, the Irish Brotherhood, it was founded in America. So that gives you all you need to know. It was then brought over and executed successfully because of the anti British sentiment and anti-Protestant sentiment on the Catholic level. But then you look at Ireland today, and all the supposed Irish nationalists have a deep-rooted hostility to Roman Catholicism, and also it appears to the Irish people, because now they are, you have hordes of people from Africa and the Middle East who are now settling in Ireland in their towns and cities, and facing serious changes in those areas. So yeah, I'll carry on reading for a bit, and we'll probably then wrap it up. So yeah, you talk about Americanism and communism being the most insidious. Okay. It is precisely with respect to which internal opposition that most Italians seem weak, forgetting their own cultural inheritance. They readily turn into the United States as something akin to the parent guide of the world. Nathan Hood just also puts in chat here something I was going to mention, which is very is that Celtic nationalism has pivoted up to being anti-English and British, but also it becomes the sort of uh, I guess you could say the sort of vassal ideology of globalism, and also one could say Americanism. And if you were to ask your average Scottish nationalist, or Welsh nationalist, or even Irish nationalist today, what is the values of you and your people and your movement? They would most likely, if I was to be a betting man, say tolerance, inclusion, and diversity. That would be the um, that would be the mantra I would expect to come out of such people. I don't know if Nathan Hood agrees with that, but if I was to be a guessing person, I think that would be the case. Um, Again, Welsh and Scottish nationalists are so readily to accept new people to settle in their respective nations, and they don't really have that real emotional connection to their own people, like the Scottish people or the Welsh people. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I thought so. Because the reason I thought so, I many years ago when I was in Scotland, I did ask an SNP supporter, what is the values of your movement, and the response was um, diversity, inclusion, and progressive politics. I think that was along the line. So yeah, that is what it is. I think um, you also see as other regionalistic movements in Europe as well. It's a very interesting tactic done um, by sort of groups especially coming out of America, because it's definitely weakened. It's weakened the UK today. But what's quite interesting is it's never follows through on its logical conclusion, even with the Scottish nationalists, who I guess are more realistic of a chance of independence. It's never actually followed through, which is rather interesting. Um, and of course, we saw with the Queen's funeral and the proclamation of the King, they immediately, when the globalist, uh, when I guess you could say the globalist sort of order allowed the mourning of the Queen and sort of aspect of traditionalism to break through. Um, Nicola Sturgeon was singing "God Save the King" and swearing true allegiance to the King in front, while the King swears that he will uphold the true Protestant religion. And that's the thing, because the trouble is, um, that is it. I mean, if a nationalist was genuine, they wouldn't be partaking in that. They would, but it's easily for them to flip on a dime. Sorry, let's continue. It is pitiable to witness a European country so debase itself. Veneration for America has nothing to do with a cultured interest in the way other people live. On the contrary, civility towards the United States leads to one to think that there is no other way of life worth considering on the same level as the American one. Our radio service is Americanized without any uh, uh, I can't read. Without any criterion of superior and inferior, it just follows the fashionable themes of the moment and markets. What is considered acceptable that is to the most Americanized section of the public, which is to say the most degenerate. The rest of us are all dragged along in its wake. And I do get that, because, as I say, with you um, maybe rap music. I mean, I've never been a fan of any form of rap music, but also, like when I referenced earlier the Princess Diana's death, it was a very small section of the public that sort of did this sort of Americanized, over emotional crying on the street, go, oh, how terrible, and doing bizarre sort of ritualistic practices of like laying flowers and teddy bears outside outside the palaces, addressing the flowers to Diana, not to the family or anything, just to Diana. And everyone, all of us, all the normal people, had to just were dragged along with it, accepted it as like just a normal thing, even though it wasn't normal. Even to this day, it's bloody ridiculous, even looking back. Anyway, so I can sympathise with that perspective. Even the style of presentation on radio has become Americanized. Who, after listening to an American radio program, can suppress a shudder when he considers the only way of escaping communism is by becoming Americanized? Those are not the words of an outsider, but an American sociologist, James Burnham. Of course, we know who James Burnham is because he's been mentioned on this channel several times. Professor of the University of Princeton, such a judgment from an American should make Italian radio programmers blush for shame. I do wonder if, because the reason why Italy had why this was the case in Italy was because of the Italian Americans, the sort of Italian diaspora in America, maybe helping to export the culture back. I don't know if that might have been a factor. The consequences of the do your own thing democracy is the intoxication of the greater part of the population, which is not capable of discriminating for itself, which, when not guided by a power and an ideal, all too easily loses sense of its own identity. There we go. So, again, sort of reinforces what we mentioned earlier here. So the next part is the industrial order in America. In the classic study of capitalism, Weiner Sombart summarized the late capitalist phase as in the adage fiat producto pariet homo. In its extreme form, capitalism is a system in which man's value is estimated solely in terms of the production of merchandise and the invention of the means of production. Remember what Charles said, it's about the reign of quantity. That is what we must reject, the reign of quantity. Okay, listen to your king. Socialist doctrines grew out of a reaction to the lack of human consideration in the system. A new phase has begun in the United States where there has been an upsurge of interest in so-called labor relations. In appearance, it would seem to signify an improvement. In reality, this is a delirious phenomenon. The entrepreneurs and employers have come to realize that the importance of human factor in a productive economy, and that it is a mistake to ignore the individual involved in industry. His motives, his feelings, his working day life. Thus, a whole school study of human relations in industry has grown up based on behaviorisms. Studies like Human Relations in Industry by B. Gardner and J. Moore have supplied a minute analysis on the behavior of employees and their motivations with the precise aim of defining the best means to obviate all factors that can hinder to maximizations of production. Some studies certainly don't come from shop floor, but from management, abetted by specialists from various colleges. Sociology investigations go as far as analyzing the employees' social ambience. This kind of study has a practical purpose. The more intense of psychological contentment of the employee is as important as the physical. In cases in which a worker is tied to a monstrous job which doesn't demand a great deal of concentration, the study will draw attention to the danger that his mind may tend to wander in a way that eventually reflects badly on the attitude towards the job. So this is the important thing that I've um, um, thought about, and all aspects of modern day working is kind of uh, yeah, sort of harks true with these statements that it is, you know, it is based on the current capitalist economy of quantity, let's say, and in that, there is, you obviously have that human factor, and we've seen in recent times the way that has become, I guess, a important consideration is mental health. And I can't remember when it was. I think it was a few years ago, probably I would say 2016, really, that I was first aware of it. But you saw more and more promotion of mental health. It's okay for men to cry, that sort of stuff. And I was thinking to myself, even how has that come about? How is that? Why is that being promoted and pushed, more so than, say, like gambling addictions, alcohol addictions, or addictions? Because that was something I do remember that was quite prevalent some time ago. And I think it's because studies have shown that the more and more women are depressed because they are not fulfilling the natural role that nature or God or whoever you want to describe to has given to them. That the sort of 60s female liberation has given them a sort of a false hope that they can um, earn material wealth, and that this would be the peak happiness of, that they can have. Pure equality will make them full and satisfied. For young men, I think the demasculization of culture has caused them to be basically soulless, wandering the wastes without any sort of direction of where they need to be going. And that's why you have like this phenomenon of like these sort of man-childs, where in many ways you have, like you see on YouTube and everything, like sort of these men in their 30s unboxing toys and what have you. So they just return to a childlike state. Again, many of them are American, but also English as well now. So, but this is something that I do wonder. Right, so moving on. The private lives of employees are not forgotten, hence the increase in so-called personal counselling. Specialists are called in to dispel anxiety, psychological disturbances, and non-adaptation complexes, even to the point of giving advice in relationship to most personal matters. Frankly, psychoanalytic techniques, uh, and one much used to make the subject talk freely and put the results obtainable by the catharsis into relief. All right, Nathan Hood. Okay, that fair enough, but I draw baseness from video games and and politics of video games and everything. I draw. Okay, I think Elder Scrolls should be given a pass, and here's why. And this isn't me being contradictory to your statement, and I think Evola would agree with me on this. The Elder Scrolls, in its premises, I can't speak of the the online version, but in its natural story, if I was to present to him on paper, it all of it has a world of natural hierarchy of kings, jarls, regional rulers, barons, and what have you. And you are a character in this where you are not equal to them, but in some cases you are uh, a prophet who has a different sort of hierarchical structure, um, in that it's a sort of more transcendent belief. So your character shouldn't be bothered or involved with the realms of politics. Maybe that's what Evelyn would probably go down the line of saying you shouldn't be involved in the realms of politics. Um, um, Yeah, you are just as guilty. But to be fair, I did a stream of Skyrim. I think quite some few years ago. I looked at the Empire, but if you're someone who has an interest in politics and video games, and you view the Elder Scrolls series as negative or anything in that way, I don't know you. So I do include Skyrim on the list as exception, just because it does actually. Very on the serious note, though, on that point, and I don't know if it's a deliberate or what have you, but there is in most of the modern video games now, in every one of them, even your Star Wars ones and everything, there's always that element of subversion, of liberalism, and what have you. I In Skyrim, even yes, you have your hints and everything, but in most aspects of the story, there is that sort of based hierarchy, um, uh, involved in that of a natural order and then a supernatural order of like the celestial bodies, and it's all you end up sort of just following the sort of the prophets and the will of the gods. Um, So yes, sovereign is he who decides. Yeah, I made the decision on that. Yes. So there we go. I made the exception. I think I think that's a fair exception to make on the matter. Anywho, I also say that I on the one final bit of Skyrim, I would also point out that a surprising amount of right wingers from the um, ethno nationalists to just your, I guess, people who are libertarians, social libertarians from all aspects of the right, uh, either know of the video game or are fans of the video game, which sort of speaks volumes, um, to be honest, and of the law. So maybe there is like something to that. Um, None of this is concerned with the spiritual betterment of human beings. So this is coming on like these employers having these interests in private lives and everything. And I had this some years ago. I had like in my work we have like uh, training and everything, and in one of which there was uh, diversity inclusion training. And some of you may have gone through this, and I've been through this recently, and it's not fun. It's not fun at all because you have to sit there and everything. But one thing I noticed is that while they have the encouragement of promoting diversity, inclusion, and progressivism and everything, there's also been like a weird sort of interest into uh, how you conduct yourself in your sexual life and everything, um, which is, again, as Evelyn points out here, it's like this really intrusive way, sort of wanting to know the aspects of your personal life. And why is this the case? Um, and it's a way of enforcing, in his view, American culture, because the the sort of uh, and we hear this with Americanism before, with like the sort of talky, touchy feely thing. You hear it with the older Brits, as the older British people, is that, oh, the stiff upper lip was the British way, and the touchy feely, talky, sort of hug it out, emotional way the way of like crying, after Diana's death and everything. That is the American way. And it is, but it's done because it is a way of reprogramming. It's a way of reprogramming your minds. And as Evola points out, none of it is concerned with the spiritual betterment of human beings or any real human problems, such as a European would understand them in this age of economics. On the other side of the Iron Curtain, man is treated as a beast of burden, and his obedience is maintained by terror and famine, which is also not good. In the United States, man is also seen as just a factor of labor and consumption, and no aspect of his interior life is neglected, and every factor of his existence is drawn to the same end. In the land of the free, through every medium, man is told he has reached a degree of happiness ethereal. Ethereal, undreamed of. He forgets who he is, where he comes from, and basks in the present. So there we go. That's the thing. It's we'll go on to the next point now, and then we'll probably wrap it up. There's quite a bit left. So, American democracy in industry. There is a significant and growing discrepancy in the United States between the shibboleths of the prevailing political ideology and the effective economic structures of the nation. A large part of studies of the subject is played by the morphology of businesses. Studies corroborate the impression that the American business is a long way from the type of organization which corresponds with the democratic ideal of US propaganda. American businesses have a pyramid structure. They constitute a top and articulate hierarchy. So this is quite interesting because even though the American culture and the system, from Evelyn's point of view, is quite anti-hierarchical because it plays on the myth of the self-made man, but in reality, sort of business and the actual market itself cannot escape the reality and truths of the world, even in this sort of way. They constitute at the top of a articulate hierarchy. The big businesses are run in the same way as a government, ministries, and are organized along similar lines. They have coordinating and controlling bodies which separate the business leaders from the mass of employees. Rather than becoming more flexible in a social sense, the managerial elite, Burnham, as he quotes on Burnham here, is becoming more autocratic than ever, something that is not unrelated to American foreign policy. So we're getting on to the point where he is actually breaking down sort of the myth of individualism and aspects of the American identity, where in reality, while Americans have been taught about being the self-made man, being the individual of their own success, then actually pointing out that the managerial elite they've come are actually more autocratic than ever, and that plays into foreign policy. This is the end of yet another American illusion. America, the land of the opportunity, where every possibility is there for the person who can grasp it, a land where anyone can rise from the rags to riches. At the first, there was the open frontier for all to ride out across. The closed and the new open frontier was the sky, the limitless potential of industry and commerce. As Gardner, Moore, and many others have shown, this is no longer limitless, and the opportunities are thinning out, given the ever-increasing specialization of labor in the productive process and the increasing emphasis on qualifications. I do wonder if this played into jobs and certain businesses going overseas, because the obsession of overqualifications and specialized labor reached a point where, in reality, they just couldn't continue it in the United States, and so went overseas. What used to seem obvious to the Americans that their children would go further than they would is for many people no longer obvious at all. Thus, it is that in the so-called political democracy of the United States, the force and the power in the land, that is to say, the industry and the economy, are becoming ever more uh, evidently undemocratic. The problem then is, should really be made to fit ideology or vice versa? Question mark. Until recently, the overwhelmingly demand has been for the former course of action. The cry goes out for a return to the real America of unfettered enterprise and of individual free of central government control. Nevertheless, there are also those who would prefer to limit democracy in order to adapt political theory to commercial reality. If the mask of American democracy were thereby removed, it become clear to what extent democracy in America and elsewhere is the only instrument of an oligarchy which pursues a method of indirect action, assuring the possibility of abuse and deception on the large scale of those many who accept a hierarchical system because they think it is justly such. This dilemma of democracy in the United States may one day give place to something interesting developments. Oh wow! So a bit. This is what we call foreshadowing. So this is something which we have seen in very recent times with the 2020 election and everything, where there has been I would say like a Mugabe style form of elections and democracies in the United States. And of course, this does go back sometimes. I know some American followers would say, well, look at the election between JFK and Nixon in 1960, and you see a similar sort of question here about the genuine results of the elections there. And also on the hierarchical system, look at who's selected in the two-party system. It's families, powerful political families. It's been the Kennedys, it's been the Clintons, it's been the Trumps. I mean, the Trump, it's an oligarchy nature in the Republican Party as well. You do have adjacent sort of vying for the throne, like the DeSantis family, and the Bushes, of course. Let's not forget them. So, it's not. It's quite interesting that this was foreseen even then, even during the whole when the myth was at its most powerful. So, what's this bit? Comments on the New Dawn stuff. In 1945, Julius Evola's Civilta Americana was published. Evola's critique was an attack on the American way of life, aside from a few passages in. So I think this was forwarded by someone else. Aside from a few passages in Rivaldo contra il Mondano Mondurano, it contained all important aspects of his analysis on American society. For some time out of print, Civilta Americana was reprinted in the early 80s by Julius Evola Foundation, Corcio. So I think this has sort of come to the end, and it's sort of explaining American his belief bits. So that's all right. So that's come to the end of Evola's writing on this. I'll provide a link in the description if you want to check that out. There's a few other links as well in that WordPress bit. So overall, I think with AA and I think with people on the sort of European distant right, this was the sort of point that they were getting at with America, not so much red and blue states, but that the problem is ultimately the nature of the American origin in and itself is fraudulent from the very beginning. And the problem is because of the perpetual primitive and I guess as they would say, sort of childlike nature of it, where it's always just seen as this new state, this sort of emerging sort of childlike state that will grow and everything. Well, it hasn't really done that, and it's grown in a different way, where the people who run America in Evola's time have really effectively been replaced by a different coalition that runs America today. And they use the same tactics that were inflicted on Italians of that era, and of Germans and French and even the British. And now the same tactics are being used to promote the progressive ideologies which infects our societies today, and also the be sort of quite blunt about this, but the anti-white commentary, which also comes from the same sorts of psychological tactics, which we see in the country today, through various aspects of degrading in the media to actively pushing and promoting mass immigration. And so this ultimately comes to sort of down to the question: is it possible for America and Americans to ever reconnect with some European ideals, or, yes, as Nathan Hood just puts into, is it actually doomed? So let's just read out what Nathan Hood put here. What should replace America if the ideas behind America are always doomed to degeneracy? So I would say that moment, that week ago, where we had the Queen's funeral, then the week of national mourning, that week, whatever happened in that week, and maybe I can't really articulate because I haven't really thought too deep about it, but whatever happened in that week, where for some reason or another we were allowed to reconnect to, even if it is in the most weak and diluted form, we were able to reconnect with the traditional nature of English society and of Scottish society, and the importance of the two, and also reconnect with the relation to God as well, in with the monarchy and the people, the people being the English people, the Scots, and what have you. If we can recapture that and have that, that would, that for me would be, I would think would be the best place to go, and that would have to replace the American ideas. And is America always doomed to degeneracy? As I said back at the start of the stream, I believe that I'm not saying that there aren't significant cultural differences and regional cultures in America which are vying for power, and the different in from the Bible Belt and Deep South, or the Black Belt, or the Northeast New Englanders, or what have you. I'm not saying that there isn't significant differences there, but I think their fundamental problem is, what is your foundational myth? I have said, and this is my sort of thing to Americans, is that, and they have to accept that, number one, they are, especially those in the in the original colonies of America, but those who are descendants from England and the United Kingdom, is that you are a that your identity and your civilization needs to be more in line and more in tune with what we experienced that week when the Queen died, and that reconnection. Um, and I think the problem is that your foundational myths aren't strong enough, and so either you have to make it stronger, readapt it, or reconnect to something more older, more mythical, and more of a transcendent belief. That would be what I think. Are they doomed to degeneracy? I don't know. I think there are some areas to America which are doomed. I think I do think like places like California and New York are doomed. I think anything. I think multiculturalism is doomed. I think the uh, um, um, living mixed. I do think even to the extent that there is a we know that there are self-segregating communities in America. I mean that's sort of been taught tirelessly before in the several years. When the black area, when black people start moving into the neighborhood, all the white people start moving out. That's just a reality, and we've seen it in this country as well. And I think there is just a maybe it goes back to just sort of a basic tribal need, but you just can't have that sort of egalitarian mixed world utopia. It just doesn't exist. Um, so I mean that's sort of my perspective on it. I do think that there is I think a lot of Americans would probably disagree with what I said tonight. I think there'll be a lot that find what was said, maybe even offensive or what have you. But I think it's important that it, even if they don't take it to heart, that they can sort of take that away and stew on that and think about it, because I do think that a good portion of our problem. I mean, we can say, oh yeah, American progressives and universities and leftism and all that sort of stuff that's come through and it's infected the West and everything. But why did it take hold in America in the first place? What is actually like the ground zero for it? Um, and that's something I think will be debated. It may not be, maybe what I said tonight, maybe that even Evola pointed out, maybe it goes back even further. Maybe even it's not, it's not to do with the actual birth of the American nation, but maybe, you know, I know that some would draw it back to, sort of the Whigs in England or something, but that, um, he was talking particularly about the Americanization post-war, and that's something that we a lot of us uh, have probably have seen in our lifetimes, and changes in our countries, which is just seen as normal in America because and it's not really challenged really in like the on the sort of like the emotional level and everything. And as I said, this isn't about like red state, blue state. This is about sort of a wider, sort of deeper, um, sort of cultural understanding. So on that part, I want to thank you all for checking in. People like Makuta, Pterodax, and I Am Retail, JD, and of course you, Nathan Hood, as well. Thank you for checking out the stream. I'm going to probably I think we read through. As I said, I'm not going to. I'll put a link into the other the N-wordification of America. I'm not going to read that out on stream. Maybe if I get a was it Rumble or something, I might do that, but won't do it on YouTube. See, I used to think the Whigs as the source, but I have largely viewed it as a meme So I think it's something else now. Yeah, I think it's something else now. I think it's it depends, because there are some that, I mean, as I say, Spengler. I mean, I think it's very much viewed by these sorts of people in cycles, and it's quite hard to determine, when one cycle ends and one begins, unless you're looking quite far back in history and you have a fuller picture. And we're talking about stuff in the moment, so it'd be hard to tell at the moment, I mean, I think, though, we can all accept that that period before World War Two and then period after World War Two was a change in some cycle. It was a change of cycle. That was like the sort of changing point. Uh, anyway, thank you, CJ Hood and Makuta and all the others for coming in, and I will try and stream. I think probably try next weekend or something, but we'll see how we do. Anyway, thank you for joining, and I will see you all later.